Well, good afternoon and welcome to this ASBP webinar, the reuse of glass partitioning systems. The Reuse Now campaign, which this webinar is part of, is sponsored by Cleveland Steel and Tubes, Optima, Excess Materials Exchange, Reusefully, Circuland, and Wood Knowledge Wales. And we are very grateful for that sponsorship because it enables us to do the work that we do. So today we've got an hour and a half. I'm going to do quite a brief introduction to the ASBP for people that aren't aware fully of who we are and what we do, and a couple of slides on the guide. Then we're going to do some quick presentations from Andy at Optima, Emily at British Land, and Darcy at Marks Barfield Architects. And then we're just trying a bit of an extended panel to bring in some more of the people that were involved in the workshop and the report, just to give a bit more of a diverse opinion on the subject. So the ASBP is excuse me, a membership organisation with about 160 organisations that are members. We work across in fact, yeah, this slide should be in full, sorry. We work across lots of different organisations within the construction industry. As the name suggests, we focused initially very much more around sustainable building product manufacturers, but now we have as members lots of different organisations like architects, engineers, contractors, demolition contractors, and we support them as part of the wider built environment to help accelerate the transformation to a healthier, lower carbon built environment. We've got lots of different areas that we work under, such as health and well-being. We look at things like indoor air quality, damp and mould, also ethics, transparency and social value. And on the technical performance perspective, particularly obviously with our manufacturing members. And then the Reuse Now campaign sits very much within the resource efficiency and whole life carbon piece. As I say, we've got over 160 members. We do lots of different research projects, including Disrupt, which was the steel reuse project that we've just finished, also on timber and biodiversity, natural materials, various different specialist working groups, including healthy paints and finishes and natural fibre insulation. And then a number of different guidance and toolkits that are freely available on our website. And I'd really encourage you to have a look at the website. There's lots of different information available, as I say, for free, past webinar recordings, and lots of different signposting to what other organisations are doing as well. Flick back to where this should be. So the Reuse Now campaign is part of the work that the ASBP do. I lead on the Reuse Now campaign, and we do various different pieces of work, such as the deep dive that we've done into glass partitioning, different events in person and on webinars, stakeholder mapping, blogs, case studies, and guidance documents. If you want to get more involved in the Reuse Now campaign, then please get in touch. A couple of different upcoming events. Again, you can find these on our website. One in particular is our awards event in June. If you've got any products, initiatives, or building projects that you'd like to put in for our awards, then please take a look at the Exemplar Sustainable Building Awards. A few bits of housekeeping. Through the webinar, you can add questions to the Q&A, please, not the chat. The panel members will also be keeping an eye on the Q&A, so they'll answer questions there as well as in the Q&A session at the end. You can upvote and comment on other people's questions. Please don't use your raised hand option. Larry, behind the scenes, will help supporting with unmuting audio if you do want to ask questions yourself. Otherwise, we'll do that for you. If you have any technical problems, please drop a note to Larry. And as you probably noticed, we are recording the webinar. So if you prefer your audio not to be recorded, then just click send anonymously. So just a bit of a background on doing the deep dives and why we've decided to do them as part of the Reuse Now campaign. We really feel with the work that we do at the ASBP that we try and have a look at what everybody else is doing and pick up the gaps as to how we can support the industry to move forward in terms of circular economy and reuse, and try and get some practical information all gathered together in one place, both research that we've done and signposting to work that others have done, with the objective to move the dial on reuse. So for the glass partitioning work, we did some desk-based research, had a number of different workshops and one-to-one discussions, and we also received some case studies from the people that were involved that we will publish after we publish the report. And the next topic that we're going to be looking at is doors, so watch this space on that one. What was quite interesting looking at glass, I'm sure you're all really familiar with this R ladder here, is that the ambition being reuse, obviously, in terms of carbon reduction and reducing the impact of extraction. But actually, one of the conclusions we came to in the report, as we also need to actually drive better recycling, reuse, to support the guidance to have that where possible, but that actually closed loop recycling is also a really good solution to come out of looking at this at the early part of the project. So glass partitioning systems are widely used in commercial fit outs, but rarely used in situ or on other projects off site. And looking across the construction sector in general, glass is rarely recycled into new glass products, with only 6% of flat glass being recycled into new products. And again, I think, as we probably all know, it's often crushed together with other building materials for fill application as aggregate or landfill. And one statistic there that we did pick up on, looking even just to reutilise the end of flat glass as cullet, can reduce annual emissions by 18.6%. So flipping that and looking at how much carbon emissions could be reduced by actually reusing rather than just recycling was another step up, but we had no statistics on that. It was really difficult to find any statistics at all on glass reuse, which comes to our point of processes to support reuse. Data is huge. Again, lots of conversations in the industry at the moment around materials passports and the value of materials passports, both generating a passport from new, but also as materials are coming out of a deconstructor project, that we can create passports for them then. But also actually more generally, just statistics reporting and measurement around reuse in the industry overall. I think, demonstrating best practice and more case studies makes people feel more comfortable about looking at doing that themselves. Early engagement, again, nothing new there. Early engagement drives a lot of improvements and benefits in projects, and getting the client and overall design team and contractor team to buy into reuse from the get-go is hugely important. And looking at decision-making, so that decision-making tree of reuse being the aspiration from the beginning. If reuse in situ doesn't work, look at taking it off-site. Then potentially, if that's not feasible, could we just maybe reuse the doors as part of the system? If that's not feasible, then potentially look at closed loop recycling before it's downcycled to aggregate. And lots of different policies that potentially we could use to support that. Incentives around tax and around planning system, penalties again around tax, but also looking as now with the increase in landfill costs, potentially putting glass into another group so that it wasn't didn't sit with the bigger classification of inert waste as it currently does. But I think the overall conclusions of the report is, is reuse of glass partitioning possible? Yes, definitely. Does it offer carbon savings? Yes. Is the reuse of glass partitioning financially feasible? Yes, in some cases. And will it become more financially feasible the more clients demand it? Yes, it will, because obviously with economies of scale, with the industry becoming more aware of the possibilities of being able to do it, the skills and the processes, and also the more case studies there are out there, the more it's proven, the less riskier the industry will feel it is as an option, and the more it'll happen. So I'm now going to move on to the presentations. So we've got Andy Stammers from Optima up next.
Good afternoon, everybody, and Andy Stammers here from Optima Products, and really pleased to have been working with Debbie on this deep dive project looking at glass partitioning over, well, since a couple of years, and I've become a bit obsessed by the project, and my colleagues get fed up with me saying, "What are you doing with that door? I might want to use it again." So the first thing to share is we will always be asked for a system, a glass partitioning system, which will include glass panels and the door, because they work together, for example, for an acoustic system. Okay. So we've looked at the three areas that are preventing or adding to the resistance, maybe to reuse. The one currently, if you look at stripping out a building for the intention of reusing those products, you've got to do it in a way that is sensitive and not in a way that is just considering that products go to landfill. So approximately it's our internal Optima internal installers calculating this to be taking about 20% longer. We also need to be looking at where the storage goes. If you're going to hold those products for future use, where they're going to live, if you can't go site to site or internally within a site. And of course, and this is driven by the industry, not by ourselves, is the infinite variety and variation in dimensions and specifications. Everything from the size of a partitioning system to the color of the framing. Everything is bespoke and is unique. So what works? Well, we would always segregate in our mindset doors from the glass partitioning. A door in itself is a finished product. It's framed by aluminium generally, so it's easier to handle. It's relatively similar time to take a door off its hinges or off a pivot plate as it is to do it in a bad way. It's a relatively low skilled operation. We have our own transport stillages for doors because we're moving. We have three deliveries of doors into London alone each week. So we have purpose-built stillages, and they are a higher carbon product in their own right, square metered within the system. And cost-wise, financially, they're a higher cost than the glass partitioning sitting adjacent to them. It's always going to work if we are working on the donor site, or the donor is the same as the receiver in terms of clients, because they're wanting the system to dovetail together in terms of program. So what is harder or more challenging is when we are required to store partition glass or doors for some form of potential future use. Considering the program normally for tender to contract award to contract install can be a year to up to 2 years. So where is that going? Who's paying for that storage? And glass is harder to identify. It's a component within a product. It's not a finished product. And no client is interested in having any markings visible on that glass panel to say what it is, what thickness it is, what's its acoustic rating, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, you have to do some form of survey with that glass. You have to bring in much more stringent protection around to make sure that the edges, the aris of the glass is protected so it maintains its acoustic property for any future use. And obviously, if we've got a different donor of the project to a new client, it's going to be harder to try and make those two programs sit together well. So who and what are the drivers for doors and partitioning purchase? We've got designers, architects, and end users all putting into the mix what they want. The obvious ones, obviously, is to make sure that we're DDA compliant and regulations, but we have operational use considerations, direction of flow, acoustics, aesthetics, as I said, what color do you want it to look like? What sort of types of patination do you want on the glass, etc. And the driver of all is currently the market is driven by floor to ceiling height. So we would say that these red ones are the key drivers to that sets out the stall for what people are putting into tenders. So here we are, we've got our ceiling, we've got our floor. Along comes somebody with a tape measure and for a refurb project, and we have a variation of floor to ceiling heights. And this is real data. So this is all the 2024 tenders that we received had floor to ceiling heights varied from 1898 to 3200. So therefore, we as the manufacturer, along with our other people in the partitioning industry, will then specify a panel or glass door to meet that variation of size. So when you strip out a project, you get a collection of glass that is infinitely different sizes, different thicknesses, some laminated. Even if you can look at the right at the back there, you've got some curved glass, smaller, thinner glass panels that will go next to the doors. And it's just a catalogue of glass that we are then trying to find homes for. And you can imagine a tender document with a specific floor to ceiling height is going to be impossible to find an exact match to a piece of glass that we've come out of a previous project. So let's look specifically at doors, because a door has its own, it's a finished product. We have identification tag that sits on the door. If you look at any Optima door, there'll be a 6-digit code on the hinge style. So we will know exactly what that door is, everything about that door in terms of its specification. And that door, this one is on an offset pivot, can be lifted off that offset pivot, moved to another location, storage, or onto another project, and its identity is already there. We will know exactly what it can or can't do, whilst glass partitionings, as I said, don't have those markings. The glass itself doesn't have that marking on it. So you're having to do that work, asset tag it, record it, reference it, put it in a set storage location, etc. So the opportunities are great. Typical double glazed door could save you, if you were to reuse it, 250 kilograms CO2 equivalent. And that's significant on a project if you're looking at carbon budget on a project compared to purchase of a new door. But there are misconceptions of what can or can't be done. Glass itself, some glass can't be recut if it's toughened. Some glass needs special climatic conditions for storage if it's laminated, and different glass will have various acoustic properties, and in a double glaze system we need to get the balance right between the two panels of glass that go into a system. So glass is in its own right never loses its integrity, never loses its performance. But what we're putting into, we've got to make sure that system maintains the properties that are required. So again, this is real data. So this is all the doors that we built last year. And you can see that everything, right from a smaller door, doors are generally speaking getting higher. We never thought we would build a door over 3 meters, and we're now getting specifications over 3 meters. But the average door is just under 2400. So typically, if you equate that to dry lining, that's about an 8-foot dry lining. So we would say the question I asked our production teams are, what is an average door? Well, the average door height is just under 2400. So let's think about that as a standard. If we had a dream scenario, everybody would class a door as a standard door, and we would then all be able to know that we can mix and match doors over future projects. Reality, it's not that case. Interestingly, in the residential domestic market, there is a standard, 1981 millimeters high and 762 wide. Now, we have a standardized width in our doors, so that's never going to be a problem, and that will match other competitors. But the height, as you can see, is going to vary. But let's just say that 2400 is our standard. So here's a specification. Again, it's a real specification. So we were asked for a 2634. That's the floor to ceiling height. They wanted a color RAL 7021, which is in the gray shades. So we have 24 standard colors. Can you just, it's a nonsense, isn't it? Just saying it there. And we do 8 color changes a day in our powder line in our factory here in Radstock. And the client here wants an offset door with a push handle. So how would we even offer something here from a reuse scenario? Well, we're not going to be able to find exactly a 2634 panel because of the variety of sizes from previous projects. But let's look at the door. What could we do with the door? Well, we could put a door in because, as I said, we have a standard 990-1024 framing system, which is DDA compliant. So we know we've got the width, and we can put in any door up to the floor to ceiling height. Any gap at the top we can make up with a over panel to make up the balance of the height. Okay, that's really good. So at tender stage, people say, well, fantastic, tell us the door height, and we can put that into our design, and we can look at the over panel. Now, we can't say that at tender stage because we won't have that door yet. There's no point me finding a door today at, say, 2438, putting that into a tender document for a project that might not be installed for up to 2 years' time. Where am I going to hold that door? So the concept would be that we would propose a system where we would give a combination of a door and a top over panel to meet the specification of the project. But we wouldn't be able to say what that is until closer to the project, what that variance. But we would be able to narrow it within a margin of, say, 200 to 200 mil. So people say, well, aesthetics. So now we have the question about aesthetics. Well, what we're looking at here is our Shoreditch range. The individual glass panels are solid glass. There's no break in those glass. These are just aluminium strips. We call it Shoreditch. Others call them Crittle bars, and that's purely aesthetics. So you could, with a little bit of creativity, move your Shoreditch or your Crittle bar configuration to align with that over panel to make it look like it was always there. The problem here is at tender stage, you just don't have the people at the tender stage, commercial tender stage, having the imagination, the willingness for innovation. You might get an option for a non-compliant bid, but that's putting in a specification, maybe a single glaze rather than a double glaze for cost options. Nobody is really at that tender stage willing currently, in our experience, to come down to that kind of level of, we'll commit to you, but we don't really know what we're committing to. So nothing will be compromised in terms of performance with such a system that I've just talked about, whether that's acoustics. That door might be a higher acoustics than the project requires, the one we find in the future, but it will always supersede. Won't affect your warranties, won't affect anything. It's purely down to aesthetics. So have we had any success? Well, we always talk about post-consumer aluminium. A lot of people will just talk about recycling. Make sure that you always ask people, are you talking post-consumer or pre-consumer? So post-consumer, it's had a life. It's been out there in the industry. It's had its carbon spent. So we've taken 15 tons of aluminium back from sites. It's had a life, and closed looped that back to Hydro, our aluminium supplier. to form our the Hydro Circal 75R. So all our aluminium we use is 75% post-consumer recycled, and we've taken 600 ironmongery components for redundant doors for reuse. So everything we design is for 25-year life cycle. No door is going to do more than 6 years. It's, you know, we all stress at tender stages about warranties, and we have all sorts of test parameters for 100,000 cycle door openings. Most doors are never going to see it. So there's all these components have absolutely got life in them, and they're refurbed, and we offer them as a reuse. Nobody would ever know that door handle or offset pivot is it's reuse. It would look the same as it always has done. I mean, I'm waxing lyrical here. We all know the reasons for doing this. We can save on carbon budgets. I think the only reason we're going to get really traction on this if there's a carbon tax introduced, then we'll see some real movement. You can add BREEAM's credits, and obviously standardization really does help reduce your wastage for future use. So really, we just got to get together as a community and work to drive down the environmental impact of the industry, because it is criminal the amount of product coming out with good life in it just going to landfill. It really is. It is not right.
You about done then, Andy?
Be done.
Okay. Fantastic. That was really interesting, and it has been really good to work with you over the last year or so. It might have felt like 2 years, but I think it was the beginning of last year. Yeah, and it's great to have Optima on board, obviously, as a manufacturer, to give us that perspective. I think we'll just quickly move on to Emily now, please, if you can share your slides.
Those come through.
Yes, thanks, Emily.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So I'm Emily Samoluk. I'm a senior sustainability manager at British Land, and my role essentially is focused on all of our developments, but particularly I've been paying closer attention to our fit outs, which over the last year, 2 years, we've been doing a lot more of as a landlord than we have historically. So it's been a really interesting learning curve getting into the world of fit out. Right, where do I start? So late last year, we launched, we call it a report, but it was more guidance around how, as British Land, we see circular economy essentially embedded within our project delivery processes to get most traction. And this wasn't us saying this is the way you do it, but this was us saying this is how we're attempting it, and, you know, wanting peers, industry to sort of also benefit. It was a report that was generated alongside GXN, who are quite involved in some of our large development schemes. So we were sort of pooling on their circular economy expertise as sort of architectural leads on some of our projects. So as I said, this came out late last year. It's available for you all to have a look at. You can find it quite easily on the internet. But in terms of like when it landed, and obviously what's going on with you know, sort of global situations and the sort of the economy at the moment, it actually was quite convenient in a world where we're finding it harder to justify spending money on low carbon materials, and actually thinking about our projects and how we can be more circular actually suits sort of the climate that we're facing at the moment. And I every project that I land this document with, I say this is the year for circular economy to shine. So we've got lots of projects and pilots, initiatives sort of ongoing throughout the year, where we're really trying to sort of supercharge circular economy within British Land. Right, next slide. There we go. So this just sort of gives an overview of what the document's about. But essentially, you know, we want to improve our processes right from project feasibility through early concepts around design, you know, right through sort of development of design into procurement. How can we procure better? And how can we then realize the outcomes that we want from every project? And bearing in mind I've not got long, but just to sort of pinpoint a few of the sort of the relevant pieces that, you know, are quite related to this initiative. But, you know, there's things around like, well, actually, we're very much led by the GLA in terms of having circular economy strategies, but actually, we're now sort of pushing for circular economy strategies on every project that we have. And we also have a lot of retail projects outside London. And I'm not saying that all those need to be war and peace, but they need to be sort of relevant to the nature and the scope of each project. But I was also thinking that actually, rather than it being a circular economy strategy for a project, that we start to think of it more as a strategy for each asset. And then in that way, getting more thinking around like how we get better at buildings as banks of materials and safeguarding those materials. But I've got a bit more to say on that a bit later. Granularity around pre-demo audits or pre-strip out audits, whatever we want to call them, is so crucial. And perhaps in the past, very much a tick box at maybe late REBA 2 if you were lucky. But actually, you know, what we've realized going through a few of our fit out projects is that as soon as a client, as soon as we know that a lease is coming to an end and a tenant's, you know, vacating and we've got the dilapidations period, that's really the time where we need to strike. And granularity and having photos is really important. So you may have worked out, I'm sort of touching on the, you know, the sort of tools at the bottom, but we've got a material tracker which essentially outlines the level of granularity we want with these audits. But we're quite fortunate that actually we've got a lot of partners we're working with at the moment that are doing this anyway within the work that they do. So there's a lot of alignment. And then the really important piece is actually just how we get better at tendering work. This is an area I've kind of like paid quite a bit of attention to, but you know, we've been very good at landing ideas with contractors once they've been appointed. So just something as simple as having a tender template within our tender packs. So then when the contractor first picks up a project, they can see our intent from day one, and we can work more closely with them to realize that. So for partitions, if we've got, you know, and I think if we've got a building where we've got existing partitions, you know, there'll be some thinking with the project team about the intent for those partitions, and the details of our expectations would sit within the tender template. And then a contractor tendering would be able to then advise based on their knowledge and experience and engagement with their supply chains. They'd be able to advise during the tender process on the feasibility, cost, logistics, you know, all of these things as a client we need to be made aware of from a very early stage. And then lastly, material passports, which I'll touch on again. But this year we're starting to do material passports for fit outs. So we've previously been very good at doing it on steel and facades, but we're starting to explore what it means for fit outs. But I think the thing that we've hit upon is even just having an inventory, you know, a live inventory of what is in our buildings is like gold dust. So we're starting to explore how we get better at just having inventories to then feed future conversations. Sorry, I'll speed up. So the project of ours that sort of featured within the report, Broadwalk House, which is an asset on the Broadgate campus, so in the City of London. So this project was actually about sort of repositioning one floor within the building. So the block date for the building is in a couple of years. So it was always going to be a short lease for the tenants coming in. So therefore it needed to be a low impact fit out, and also a fit out that we could easily reuse the materials again. So there was a high reuse drive behind this fit out. Our partners, so we worked, so Cast were appointed as the contractor on this project, who worked closely with Material Index to source us some partitions from a donor site, which was found through Material Index's platform. As you can see, it wasn't a huge amount, but I think, you know, as we're starting these initiatives, you need to start small to give you a much smaller scope to work to. So then it's, you know, it's a lot safer if something goes wrong, or, you know, there's lessons learned. It's not so much of an issue, but I think if you can get it right for a small quantity, then it's much easier to then scale up. And I think traditionally, as a client, we've been very good at trying to go large, but then try and slim it down. So this was a really good initiative, and, you know, partitions that, you know, everyone was really pleased with in terms of the quality, the finish. You know, Cast, the team, project team, you know, really complimentary about the level of finish. And, you know, it did involve, you know, lots of thinking around logistics and how you practically get these partitions from one site to the other, and how you design them into the space. So there was sort of dry lining infills that were required. And don't get me wrong, I think when we went to site and spoke to the project manager, you could see it had been a stressful kind of activity, but very rewarding. And for us as a client, lots of lessons learned about this. I think the interesting piece was the tenant that then did come in to occupy this space wanted more meeting rooms, which meant that we had to source additional partitions that matched what had already been put in. And again, that was, you know, successfully achieved via Material Index's platform again. So, but it's just one of the things that we never really considered is when you implement reclaimed materials into your space, but then if defects arise, or you know, for whatever reason you need more, it's just thinking about how you would respond to those sorts of situations as a client. We've got the experts on the panel later, so all your detailed questions, I'm sure, will get answered by them. And then just as a client, like, I think some of my thoughts around that initiative and just where we're headed, you know, and it was interesting because when we left Broadwalk House and you know, thinking, wow, what a great achievement. You know, we were then faced with a couple of projects where, so one of them had loads of glazed partitions in, and, you know, we were approached by the contractor saying, you know, you've done this at Broadwalk, what do you want now with these? And actually, realistically, we couldn't again replicate what we did, but the compromise was the upcycling route. But then we've also had another project where there were loads of existing partitions in that actually we've gone for a really high reuse on site strategy. And I think that's where my thinking is more around, well, actually, can we just get better at managing our assets and the materials within them? And as we start to take more ownership as a client on fit out, it gives us control around what actually happens with those materials. And we've obviously got a more invested interest to secure their, you know, their full life, their full potential. So it's been interesting since. And then The other piece, so we're about to come out with a fit out brief for all of our fit out projects. And we've actually, so where there is an existing fit out that we can use, we're setting those projects a more strenuous embodied carbon target to really drive that reuse. So watch the space, because that brief will shortly be out. And yeah, I think just in terms of the material passports piece, again, it's, I think, you know, we've got a project coming online this year where we're doing passports on our fit out for the first time, and it's actually how those material passports sit with the asset to then enable your circular economy strategies in future. That's going to be the interesting piece. And, you know, retaining our materials and making sure that all of our contractors are on board with the high reuse targets that we want to set on fit outs moving forward. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there, but obviously on the panel for questions later if anyone has any.
Very much, Emily. I think yeah, a really interesting point there where you know, the standard kind of academic benefits of circularity are include certainty on your supply chain, certainty of materials, but I guess we wouldn't have thought a year ago that that was something that we'd really be needing to look quite hard at, with all of the tariffs and everything else that are now currently coming through that may directly or indirectly affect the supply chain on new buildings. Darcy, next up, please.
Thanks, Debbie. I'll try and keep it swift so we can get onto the panel discussion. Right. Can you all see that screen?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm Darcy Arnold-Jones from Barfield Architects. I'm an architect and the circular economy lead at the practice. I'm really going to talk about how we're moving towards circular economy with the emphasis on move. I think as architects, we have a huge agency to make the right decisions at the early stages, which will then affect all of the project throughout the later stages and further into deconstruction and hopefully second life, third life, fourth life. So at MBA, we're really trying to become a regenerative practice. I think in the industry, we're still trying to work out what that means, but it's moving away from just a risk mitigation mindset and moving to just designing, practicing and building within planetary boundaries where possible. And you'll all be familiar with the figures, but I think a key thing is the amount of waste the industry actually generates is pretty horrific. Part of this really is understanding value and working around mindsets, both our own, really, it's been a real journey within the practice, but also with our clients. So transitioning from looking at a building from just a space-based mindset to a material asset-based mindset. So the building's not just valuable because of the rents, but also because of the bricks, the mortar, all the labor that's gone into it, the histories, the material extraction, and the social environmental effects. So regarding glass partitions, I'm going to move through our successes, some of them quite limited, but also in particular the lessons learned. So understanding the carbon and the cost, prioritizing reuse in situ, the demand from recipient projects, both in-house and further afield, looking at the reality on site, the easy wins, and then how we can design for future deconstruction. So I think quantifying and understanding the cost and the carbon initially is really important on a project by project basis. As Emily mentioned, I think choosing your easy wins and your small battles really per project, so you don't start to give circularity a bad name, I think is key. But yeah, the life cycle carbon impact. So this is just taken from one clip, which we were doing a project recently for 1 meter of double glazed partitioning is around 180 kilograms. So it's not insignificant, but also the cost. I think that's a key thing to understand as well. It needs to be economically viable as well as environmentally. So first case study, I'm kind of go through this on a case study basis, comparing two of them. And I won't name names because some of them are quite limited in success, but we were the Cat A architects on this one, the commercial fit out in 2021. The Cat B team were already on board and it was a turnkey solution. So we had the client and the future tenant ready and the contracts had been signed. So that was really the big issue coming into it with the contractual obligations which had already been put in place. But for the Cat A, we managed to save over 550,000 kilograms of carbon. The Cat B stats, we're looking at around kind of 334 per meter squared. And if the glazed partitions, there's a huge number of glazed partitioning already in that building, which have been put in 2021. If contracts hadn't been signed, which had basically said that it needed a certain amount of acoustic and warranty for each partition, a further kind of 1.4 kilograms could have been saved per meter squared, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but that equates to over 80,000 bananas, for example, or 44,000 miles by London bus, or over 13,000 showers. So it's not insignificant. And I think if you can reuse in the right way, then the costs and the logistics are really driven down, which I'll go on to. And this is another case study. So we were actually the circular economy consultants on this one, not the architects. And we were brought on in the deconstruction period to try and facilitate the reuse of all of the fit out materials. And again, these have been put in kind of 2020, 2021, barely used because the current tenants have gone bust. So they're all really good quality new materials. And so the overall carbon saving from all the reused materials we sent to the donor sites was nearly 150,000 kilograms of CO2e. The actual carbon saving from the glazed partitions was 913, but the estimated carbon saving could have been 18,800. And because we were brought on so late, the current team obviously hadn't considered reuse at an early stage in situ, which is a shame. But it was, again, contractual reasons. The tenants weren't accepting, or they didn't have the right mindsets to understand the impacts of reuse and cost. But that equates to kind of nearly 250,000 bananas, nearly 120,000 miles by London bus, and then kind of nearly 40,000 showers. So again, a huge amount of carbon. So as architects, we've really moved our process. First and foremost, looking at reuse in situ. So this kind of, you won't be able to read it, but a very kind of complex, almost a think diagram, is our process of understanding what it takes to actually reuse materials, the decisions that need to be made. And we'll work through this for each material, each product on a case-by-case basis. So in this case, for the first case study, the glass partitions could have very much been reused in situ, but mindset being a key one, the contractual and program implications were a huge barrier. So for case study A, this is just illustrating the huge issues in the industry at the moment. So it's about longer term thinking. So the light blue lines are the new partitions which were put in, and the dashed red lines are the previously demolished partitions. And in some cases, a partition was being put in pretty much in the same place, 100 mil, where it previously was. So we just need to start thinking differently, designing out waste, thinking from an early stage around kind of new innovative ways to use materials and reuse materials. So this was that case study A. So the previous partitions put in kind of 2020, very good quality partitions, not bad looking. And then during the strip out, again, just a huge amount of opportunity. And then the new reinstalled partitions put in kind of 100 mil. I don't actually have exact photos of where they put in 100 mil. I should have kind of prior thought of that for this presentation, but that's just to give you a flavor of the opportunities there are to avoid waste. So then if you aren't able to reuse in situ, the next step we'll go through is looking at recipient projects and the demand from recipient projects. And this is the kind of the thinking we went through on these projects. So can it be reused in situ? In those cases, no, even though I'd have rather done. Can it be relocated within the building? We looked at putting some of them in the basement, but I'll go on to the logistical issues further on. And so we were looking at kind of what's the condition of them, can we deconstruct them, and can we reuse them elsewhere? So first of all, within our practice, I think architects have a huge opportunity, as well as clients, to think of their own kind of practices and portfolios and what have you got currently going on. And you can speak to the person next to you on the desk next to you and say, kind of, do you guys need a load of partitioning for this community charity project? And then in this case, we had two projects in the office, one of which being a charity community forest school, and one of which being a kind of a children's community centre, which we identified as being potential receivers of partitions. And then on that case study B, where we were just facilitating the reuse, there was a huge amount of demand for the partitions. I mean, the ones on the upper floors were really lovely, recently installed timber glass system, and there were over 15 recipient projects interested in those partitions. So it's, yeah, not for lack of trying. but yes, the realities on site, I think, is a key thing, and that was where we really had our lessons learned. So in the first case study, we did a site walk around with the demo guys to understand, right, we've said we want this kind of 86 linear meterage of partitions deconstructed to be reused elsewhere. And they'd started deconstructing them and realized that because they were floor to ceiling height partitions, to about 2.4 meters high, they couldn't actually get them out of the building because the goods lift wasn't floor to ceiling height and they couldn't fit them in the goods lift. And the pieces of glass were much too big for 2 people to carry downstairs. So there were health and safety issues was a key thing. There's regulations on the weight and the size of glass which 2 people can safely carry. So thinking around that floor to ceiling height and how, if you can get something into the building, you need to get it out of the building, just as initial design led. Labour was key, particularly on that second project. So the team, 4 guys, took kind of 4 days to take down these glass partitions, which was brilliant. And they were all ready to go off to a receiver project. But the cost of transport, the cost of storage, and the actual kind of specific conditions needed for the storage of those glass panels, so they need to be stored at a slightly different angle, which you can read all the details in the report, meant that it just wasn't feasible from a cost to carbon perspective for them to be reused. And also the acoustics. So we actually had people coming on site with big speakers to understand what were the acoustics of those partitions. And they were going to very much accept that level of warranty and acoustic performance. But yeah, the logistics was key. But there were a lot of easy wins, particularly, as Andy mentioned as well, doors. They're modular, they're deconstructible by nature. So all of the doors were reused elsewhere. All the glass was recycled with Saint-Gobain as cullet, which is, again, a great easy win if you can't reuse in situ or elsewhere. And then all the metal and timber was recycled, although kind of we acknowledge that that's pretty much downcycling these days. So just telling you kind of where they went to. So some of the doors on that first project went to our forest school and nursery project, and they're currently being stored in a couple of different locations. Both kind of, someone's kindly offered us a storage space in central London, and the client has some space on their site. And then in that second case study, kind of, there were multiple recipients, one of which being Big Penny in Walthamstow. And they took, yeah, not just all of the doors, but a huge amount of material. And there was a load of carbon saved. And yeah, it's a real win, both kind of social good as well as environmental and cost savings. And then just to end on designing for deconstruction in the future. So as architects, as I said, we've got a huge responsibility to make the right decisions in the early stages. So we're kind of doing this with each piece we come across as we're struggling with reuse in fit outs and further afield. So for partitions in particular, we're looking at designing it with a standard datum, so be that kind of 2.4 meters with a flexible head and base details, or sat at the top of a door, so 2.1 standard detailing. Looking at smaller modules of glass for ease of deconstruction, so the Walter Siegel method of deconstruction, which is an architect who designed for self-built principles really, but it was reducing the wet trades and designing in smaller pieces. Using less glass in general, using sturdy frames so that when you're deconstructing, you're actually able to get them apart without warping them, and for longevity. Considering the type of glass used, so Saint-Gobain will only take certain types of glass for reuse to become cullet, or the kind of manifestation, can you actually, whatever you're putting onto that glass, can you get it off for flexibility in future? And then considering manufacturer take-back schemes. So as hopefully people like Optima start to develop their take-back schemes, then when we're specifying materials at an early stage, we know that it's got an end-of-life route, circular end-of-life route. And then also working with manufacturers. So we're really trying to work with engineers and manufacturers from an early stage to understand how can we actually get these out of the buildings. Speaking to the demolition guys on site the other day, they just said kind of, we tend to design really complex details, which like Japanese lovely timber joints, but actually if they can access that material and get to it, then they can probably deconstruct it for reuse. So it's kind of thinking more practically, as well as designing nicely. So yeah, thank you. That's everything.
Thanks a lot, Darcy. I think we're just going to quickly do a round robin around the other extended panel. Just one sentence to say who you are, where you're from, and where you're at with the reuse agenda would be great, guys, please. Do you want to start, Rob?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob from Material Index. I look after the brokering operations. Material Index, we're a reuse platform, so we do the cataloging of buildings to enable the reuse, and we sell them through our sort of private online marketplace. So that's about us. And then, sorry, what did you want? Just something on where we're at with reuse in general, or?
Yeah, just well, you've obviously done because you've been cited as one of the team involved in the project, so I think you've been doing quite a lot. So
I guess my 2 cents on partitions are it's clearly a really difficult product category to sell and broker. I think it's definitely not one of the low-hanging fruits and something that we steered away from initially, but there's so much of it available. There's a lot of carbon associated with it, and there is demand for it. So like kudos to Emily and her team for kind of really driving through the demand side for it. And we were fortunately able to facilitate that. I think Darcy's decision tree really shows like how complicated it is. It's interesting to see that down on paper because we've kind of lived that from the logistics and decision-making point of view. But yeah, again, great for you to put this together because it is like these small wins that lead to the bigger wins. So I think the project with British Land was 7 linear meters, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is successful reuse. And actually just this week, we've done another project with them where it's 30 linear meters. So we are scaling up 4 times on this next project. So if we can keep getting those increases in scale, the costs should all come down. And I do believe this will become like economically viable to reuse partition.
thanks, Rob. Matt?
Yep, afternoon everyone. My name is Matt Robinson. I'm the head of sustainability at Workplace Futures Group now, which includes Modus and Ambit as a fit out contractor and a refurb contractor. My sort of experience so far with reuses, especially with partitions, we've got experience in reusing on-site glazed partitions as they are. We've got experience with reusing within sort of worktops as well, so not necessarily that direct reuse. But the recycling and the sort of upcycling of glazed partitioning as well. And also got experience with the closed loop recycling scheme with Saint-Gobain as well. So we're quite far down the journey, but still obviously recognise there's a long way to go.
Thank you. Rosanna?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rosie, Group ESG Lead for Cast Interiors. We're a fit-out contractor and the procurer of the glazing at British Land's Boardwalk House project. As Rob said, we've just secured 31 additional meters of glass. So that's been collected, I think, this week, and then just obviously progressing with being able to buy from donor sites. And we've got experience on another project reusing existing systems. So I think we're actually turning a single glazing into a double glazing system. Just quite interesting. And yeah, we're reaching the next stages where we're actually trying to obviously now get our glass from deconstructed projects back into the system with material index. So that's where we're at.
Yeah. James?
Hi, yeah, James Parler. I'm head of technical for the FIS. We're a trade body that represents the finishes and interiors sector. In terms of our engagement with reuse, we recently, I'm afraid it's in the area of suspended ceilings with tiles. It was an easy win. We launched a reuse project which attempts to solve the storage problem. And it also makes some gains in terms of homeless product, i.e. reusable products where the manufacturer doesn't have their own take-back scheme in place just yet. You know, to a certain extent, with certain rules applied, we can take those products into our storage hub and find donor products. In the world of partitions, we have very good engagement with all of the partition manufacturers via our working group, and we have spoken to them about reuse a few times. You know, we've made really good gains with companies like Optima in terms of encouraging the use of take-back schemes, but we're also keen to start pushing the conversation with the wider supply chain, particularly with our contractor base as well, what their role is. Thank you.
Last but not least, Ben?
So was that me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so Ben Cartwright, I have 2 hats kind of here. So one being reusefully. We do lots of data and material audits, all obviously focused around reuse, and then one being urban miners. So that's sort of moving to the physical side. So actually getting the stuff, sorting out all the logistics, finding homes for it, and you know, everything in between. So I suppose with partitioning, when I started doing audits about a few years ago, we were looking at the glass partitioning and thinking, nah, that probably won't get reused. And then sort of over the years, the likes of Optima came around and it was like, oh, okay, this can be reused. And then when we started up Urban Miners, we were sort of experimenting around, and we we had an opportunity to take about, I think, 20 partitions from one site and 50 from another. So we said, yeah, let's do that. How hard can that be? And it turns out it is quite hard. So we've taken them, and we currently have them in our warehouse. We do have a project awaiting sign off where we should be installing something like 30 or 40 of them. So that's been quite interesting, to take the inventory and supply it to someone and get them to work around the inventory as opposed to matching it up with what they already have. But obviously that requires a bit of flexibility on the client design contractor side. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you. So we've had a couple of questions. I'd encourage people, if they want to ask a question, to pop them in the Q&A. One of them is, do you all have examples of specifications for the reclaimed components, especially aesthetic characteristics or other minimum thresholds for a used element? I don't know, Darcy, if you want to pick up on this. I'm not 100% clear as to what they're asking.
As in kind of to facilitate the reuse of it, but also so it's kind of performance spec based at that point. So we have been rewriting all of our specifications, particularly for fit out materials, so that contractors can reuse them or can choose reused materials.
Right.
It's difficult because when you're going out to tender, you want to make sure that it isn't too onerous that you can't actually find reuse partitions, but it's conversations with the client really, and well, if you've got a future tenant, is understanding what they'll accept, and often what we're finding is that actually we've already found the partitions that we want to use, because at the moment there aren't the stocks to go and choose between a load of reused partitions, so they're probably from another project we've done, so we can quite clearly actually show the future contractors. So some of these smaller projects, will take them along to site and show them the store and say this is what we've got, work with it. But yeah, moving forwards, we're writing all of our specs, and it's more performance based than anything.
Right, thank you. And I guess with a lot of this, it's keeping it not vague, but not exact either. It's within a bracket, so you have a little bit of tolerance depending on what materials are available when you actually get to the stage where you're needing to source them and bring them into the project. James, you had your hand up?
Yeah, we examples are hard to come by, right? But we did produce a reuse specification for tiles as part of for ceiling tiles as part of our reuse project, and it was something that we had to do in conjunction with the manufacturers to put together essentially a condition specification. The type of tile that can be reused, and then there's also a specification for storage and transport. So these things can be pulled together. When it comes to partitions, in the absence of reuse schemes that harmonize, products from a suite of manufacturers, it really falls on the individual manufacturers to produce the information in terms of the limits of how a product can be reused, what condition can it be in, what its age can be. Those are questions that really first and foremost have to go to the manufacturer, but it will be different for every product.
Got one for Andy. Has Optima made any design modifications to their glass partition systems to make dismantling and recovery more straightforward? Yeah, I think there's two sides to all of this, isn't there? There's making the most of what we have already existing in buildings, and then learning lessons from that to feed back in to designing new.
Yeah, so for design for reuse, so we have a product that is specifically designed. It's called an adaptable wall, so it's a modular partitioning system which can be solid or glazed. That has design feature to minimize damage when taking it apart. All our systems are silicon free, dry. They're dry, so they are relatively simple to dismantle. And of course, we've designed an adaptable meeting room. So and you can even lease that. I think we need to be thinking also, why are everybody pursuing purchase? What about leasing, and put the onus back on the manufacturer to solve the problem of moving it or relocating it, or something like that. But the answer to the question is yes, and we've got designer guides on our websites, and anybody can look at those, and you'll see those systems.
Thank you. One for Ben. What has your experience been with reclaiming partitions? What does that process look like? What are the main difficulties? I think you could take over the next 20 minutes answering that. So if you just pick up on a couple of points.
Exactly. It can be, as someone mentioned earlier, very stressful, I think. I would say probably my main point on all of this is that you've got to pick your battles. So some buildings are going to be really easy to get it out of. I mean, we've mainly focused on the getting it out side so far, so that's part of it as well, the sort of market aspect. But yeah, we've mainly focused on getting it out. So we're working with the strip out contractor on the project. And one of the projects was more kind of amenable to it. So there was a bit of temporary storage space that we could use and stack it up while we were waiting for a collection. And that was okay. And there was plenty of room in the loading bay, and it was relatively flat, so that's fine. The other one, we pushed it probably a little bit on, and the specifics of the building. So the size of the goods lift is massive. Just how easy it is to get around, whether it's safe as well, I think. So the whether it's level, health and safety obviously a massive consideration with glass. So I do think that picking battles is very, very important. I mean, in some cases reuse won't make sense. However, we did do it, and we did find that it worked. And when it comes to storage, so we have a warehouse. Luckily, we have that at fairly low cost, so we're not too worried about it sitting there for a while. I know you can't leave it around for too long, but overall, I think that financially it can work. Well, we'll see really, but yeah, definitely pick battles on getting it in and out. And it's very, very practical stuff. It's does it fit here, or is it going to, so goods lifts, I think on one of them we could get 2 in, or the strip out contractor could fit 2 in like that, because there was a kind of raised section at the back. But we probably in future we would turn that particular one down, just because of the amount of effort and the health and safety considerations, and yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, any specific questions on that, I can definitely wax lyrical about.
Matt, just thinking of the case study that you put forward as part of this, which we will publish after the report's been released, noting that you had the dry lining contractor to deconstruct and reconstruct the partitioning system.
Yeah.
How important was it to engage with your supply chain and have a supply chain that was willing to have a go?
Yeah, I think it's very important. They were very keen to sort of be involved in that process from the start. When we were reusing the glazed partition, it was taking down on site and put in a different position on the same floor plate. So it sort of negated all the issues with the goods lift and getting the glass actually out of the building, which really helped. Another thing that they did was they made sure when they took the glass out, they didn't reuse any of the tracks, top track or the bottom track. It was just the glazing. So having sort of control over sort of the things that could go wrong was key for them. And it's something they were relatively happy to do it, and there wasn't that many issues on site. I think everything went pretty smoothly in terms of the delivery of that project. So yeah, I think, like I say, getting involved early, making sure they're comfortable is key.
And another interesting thing as well around that is the difference, which did come up in the workshops and the discussions as well, the difference between the warranty or insurance on the product and the warranty and insurance on the workmanship, and those being 2 different things from a risk perspective, whether the client's happy to take the risk on the product, but then obviously you've got the guarantee on the workmanship if the supply chain that you're working with is happy to do that with an existing product. I don't know if you want to say a bit something about that, Matt, and then see who else might want to pick up on that.
Yeah, you've got to have a client who's sort of willing to work with it and with sort of the idea of reuse, because like you say, there is some barriers in terms of warranties of actual product when you're reusing something that you don't know what it is. So it was really important to get their buy-in from the start. They were keen to do it. They saved money as well on the scheme because, like I say, it was just moving within the same floor plate. So financially, it made sense for them. And in terms of actual performance of the glazing, they were happy as well. So yeah, the workmanship warranty was there still in terms of how we actually fitted the glazed partitioning, but on the performance side of it, they were happy to sort of work with the idea of reuse, and they were very, very good with that throughout the scheme. So yeah, definitely important.
Emily, I don't know if you want to pick up on that warranty piece.
Yeah, I mean, the only point really from like a client perspective is to just have that articulated. And I think like what tends to fail is a reuse initiative's put forward and then we're told, but this, means no warranties, or, insurance becomes an issue. But and then that's an instant turn off, obviously, for a lot of people. But I think you just have to work through the complexities of it. And in terms of warranties and insurance, how far you can get with your existing supply chain and engagement with the manufacturers, and then take a view on any residual risk. So it just, it has to be. But I think in our case, the initial ask is to make sure that the risk is articulated properly so we can make an informed decision. And that tends to be the case for a lot of circular economy initiatives.
Thank you. Rosie, from Cast Interiors perspective, both on the Broadwalk House project and any other sort of reuse experience you've got in terms of any particular approach to design and reinstallation, I don't know if you've got any particular thoughts on that.
I think we've been quite fortunate in that the projects we've had reuse, we've been leading the design, because we've got our own in-house team who can be flexible with the glass that is available. So for Broadwalk House, we sent a request to Material Index, and we kind of got like 3 options back of different sizes, and then we can have a conversation with Emily and the rest of the design team and figure out how we can make the glass fit, or do we need to have an additional bulkhead or some sort of alternative solution to make it work. I think that really it does help for everyone to be on the board with that.
Thank you. Just going back to another one of the Q&A questions, and one that popped up in the chat as well from Nitesh, looking at labelling. I guess one for you, Andy, and perhaps James. Our manufacturer is looking to add the necessary labels to make reuse easier by having thickness or acoustic rating etched on the panels. Nitesh kind of referred to the technical specification labelling as happens with domestic glazing. So just really, I guess, where you're at internally with that, Andy, and potentially, I guess, from James, sort of lobbying the industry more generally to enable that marking to be specific to the panes as well as the doors.
So yeah, again, we can do it. So all our doors are marked with as I said, with this unique serial number, and we can very quickly bring up all the spec. With glass, there's an industry opposition. It's a snag point for having marks on the glass. We've trialed only 7 millimeters by 7 millimeter QR code transfer that can be put onto the glass. But again, it's one hand we're asking for identification. Next, people are saying we don't want any marks on the glass. We have looked at an RFID tag that sits behind the element extrusion, so you can't see it, but it's cloaking the signal. But we can. The answer to your question is it is possible to mark glass, but the client has to buy into the downside of having marking on their glass, which contradicts their snagging list.
Yeah, and it is, again, I think in some of the reports that I was reading, if you look at the quality of flat glass through the decades, the quality that we're now able to achieve is fantastic. Now everybody expects that quality to be that and clearer. And yet, if you look back, you know, the maybe tiny air bubble that might have been a pane of glass, you know, decades ago, it was accepted. And I guess one question out to the industry is why are we demanding perfect? Which is, I think, is a really interesting, and that speaks not just to new and the additional processes that you have to go through to make it as perfect as possible, but also then the reused product that may not be absolutely perfect, but is definitely fit for purpose in the sense that, you know, you can still have acoustic properties to a point and provide the private space and whatever else you desire, partitioning to deliver. James, I think, were you?
I can come in on this. Yeah, this is one of those areas where, you know, our goals are harmonious with the goals of the wider industry, particularly in the area of product safety. You know, product marking is part of that. And in the current consultation, the government green paper, you know, we're seeing the downstream effects of the new EU CPR in digital product passports, right? And, you know, the importance of data like disassembly instructions making its way into that is going to be part of it. I think the only area where we need to be a bit careful, and Andrew already said it pretty well, is actual marking of components is not necessarily the best way to rely on these. I mean, it should be, you know, it should be remembered that a pane of glass won't fulfill a performance characteristic on its own. It's a system of the framework and the glass. And you know, even when it comes to conformity marking, the actual marking of products is exempted for exactly the reasons specified. You know, that people don't want to see it. We definitely need to get better at relying on the digital twin, essentially, to carry that information. And as was also remarked earlier, leaning on those pre-strip out audits to do a good job of identifying what products are on site, who the manufacturers are, via the you know, as it is currently, the O&M manual, but in times to come, the client asset management system, the digital twin, the information should be there, and we shouldn't be relying on a mark on the glass or on the frame.
Yeah,
And I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, my point was going to be around the digital twin as well, so I put it down. But yeah, I mean, I guess just expanding on that a bit, it's going to be about being very strict with updating the digital twin throughout its life, which I know is the point of a digital twin, but just, yeah, having quite strict protocols in place. So if a, you know, glass partition system does get removed, that's actually reflected or replaced or repaired in some way, or if anything happens to it throughout its life or throughout the life of the building, then that's reflected. But yeah, same point as James.
Howard's asked a question about glass mentioned in the case study was too large to take out. How did it go in? I think that was the goods lift issue.
That was.
Yeah.
Andy, I know you keep trying to jump in to say something if you wanted to jump in first.
no, I was just going to reiterate the point about a piece of glass is a component of a system. It's not a system. That's why we've tried to focus on the door. The door is an integral finished product. You can say everything about it. It's marked, etc., etc. So sorry.
No, that's fine. No, yeah, no, it's a good question. How did it get in the building in the first place? That's exactly what I asked the demo guys on site at the time. And because they were floor to ceiling height, they obviously couldn't fit in the goods list. So we couldn't get it out. And then apparently there's very different health and safety rules. And any demo guys on the call, please correct me. But I was told that carrying something up the stairs has different rules to carrying it down the stairs. So the height and the weight of it, 2 guys for glass in particular, they weren't like allowed to carry it down, whereas they would have been able to carry it up. And also it was 20 years ago, so they probably didn't have the same kind of rules. They probably carried it up and put it up into the building. So, but yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think we should all be querying and questioning current practice on site, and if someone says, oh no, this can't be done, why? Or why won't you accept the glass in this certain way? So yeah.
Thank you.
An interesting point. Sorry, just to.
Go on, Andy.
So we did a large project many years ago where the partitioning had to be lifted up, and a large window was taken out. It was a very, very large tower on the Thames, one of our biggest projects we did. So you're never going to get that out. 30 something floors worth of work that could only be lifted in through specialist construction craneage on the time. So they're never going to come out. So maybe there's a bigger thinking about construction design for future movement of product in and out of the building.
We've got a few minutes left, so I don't know if you want to do kind of a bit of a summary around maybe the biggest opportunity that you see in the reuse of glass. Oh, Matt.
I've got an opportunity potentially. We've actually got a project in the city at the moment where we have got 300 linear meters of glass coming out. So if anyone does want to get involved, please let me know so we can try and work through some of the details and the issues that we've obviously talked about today. So there's one opportunity.
Thank you.
Do they want to put any in? Repeat my question.
Potentially, but it's on a different floor, so it might be something to look at for sure.
I think any summary from you, Emily, in terms of a client and where you can see things going?
No, I mean, I think like just reflecting on like the points I said, like I'm quite keen that, as we're starting to procure more Cat B or Cat A plus, depending on which way you want to look at it, but the more we procure finishes essentially for our buildings, it's then incorporating those into the asset, and seeing the value in that whole asset, which is inclusive of the fit out, and sort of like safeguarding that for future, and getting better at having inventories, I think is going to be really key, because then we can weave strategies to make sure that we safeguard and reuse partitions, like basically at stage 0, stage 1 of REBA plan of works, where actually things are much more meaningful. So yeah, and then I think what we've been doing is speaking to our peers, about our processes and what we're doing, and we're only going to be able to get much better at this if we've got opportunities to share amongst our development, or amongst the developers community. So really implore other developers or landlords of kind of serviced offices to sort of start thinking the same, because we're trying to move stuff around our portfolio, and obviously the opportunities are still limited even on our portfolio. So the more we share, the better.
And I guess for all of you, are you finding that it is very London centric due to the GLA requirements and the circular economy planning statements, and I guess with having yourselves, Emily and Grosvenor, and very sort of London focused and wanting to push the envelope on reuse, are you finding any of the panel any projects outside of London that you're getting involved with on reuse generally, and particularly on glass partitions?
I mean, it's fair to say that outside of London, we're not as far along on the journey. We've got a lot of retail assets outside of London, and my retail colleagues have actually just started looking at alternatives to retail strip out. So we've obviously got a lot of retail windows that we're sort of starting to think about. And I know those guys have been in touch with Material Index as well on what we can do outside of London, but it's yeah, much further behind. But I think particularly on retail there is a you know an obvious opportunity, and one we'll continue to watch and support.
Thanks. James, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on outside of London activities.
Only that I'm not too concerned about a London-centric approach for the time being. You know, it's still encouraging. I think when pods get specified outside of London, and people specifying pods is still a big gain in terms of attitudes and the way we're driving demand. I hope it's not too much of a distraction, but I think the demand side is very important. The manufacturers clearly have a lot of there's a lot they can do to help this process along, but we also have to push them with the right demand in the right areas, and pods is one of them. It's also worth pointing out that I think there was a question earlier about manufacturers developing products that are more reusable, more easily disassemblable. It bears pointing out that products 10-15 years ago, there were very popular partition products very much like that were much more reusable, much more disassemblable, and they revolved around the use of those datum points that Darcy, I'm so happy, pointed out. The door head height at standard door, based on a standard door size, the dado height, etc. But they just went horribly out of fashion. So we do have to make sure that if we want partitioning manufacturers to offer products that suit this environment, we have to buy them.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really fair comment. And I think a thread through what we've talked about today and definitely in the report is around the standardization piece, both in terms of what the client's asking for and the processes at the front end, like Emily was mentioning about the tender processes and templates, through into having a more standardized set of specifications, more standardized product, that and Andy picked up on during our workshops to say, at the end of the day, for a client to specify something that's more standard sizes is actually not particularly benefiting the client in the first use. It's benefiting whoever then takes that for second use, third use, and onwards. So it's really trying to think of the future whole life, as we all talk about, of these products, and what's going to happen to them at the end of that life, and really almost paying it forward, I guess. But that's not a thought process that everybody has, and I think it's up to us that are further down the line with these thought processes, with the benefits, the case studies that we can show the benefits, that we share it as widely as possible, which is one of the reasons why we've done this deep dive, to try and get the conversation going, and engage with the wider industry to show the art of the possible. So thank you ever so much, everybody, for being involved in the workshop. The finishing interiors sector supporting the workshop. I think a lot of the attendees came from your members and ecosystem. So yeah, it's really good to have had so many people involved in the webinar for what is really obviously quite a niche topic. So yes, thank you all very much. We will be releasing the report shortly. You as attendees will get a copy of that automatically, and I'd ask you to share it with your colleagues. Thank you very much all, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Bye.